Welcome to the Third Degree Masonic Podcast, where we are always on the level. Today, we would like to introduce you listeners to one of the hardest working Masons that we personally know. You may know him as a past master of multiple lodges, a master of the craft for the Royal Schofield Society, or even as a master martial artist. We would like to welcome Brother Jim Taylor to the show. Welcome, Brother Taylor. How are you?
Thank you. It's a pleasant day to be here.
I agree. Cold, though.
A little chilly out there, but it's not over yet. I hope the snow is gone.
Amen to that. So, Brother Taylor, we'd like to just get straight into the questions for the listeners. How long have you been a Mason?
I petitioned a lodge, Calumet Lodge. I believe it's 612. It used to be located over on Broadway and South Street in 1987. My daughter was not yet born yet. And we were going through the degrees, and I said, well, if my wife goes into labor, what do we do here? I'm in the degree, but we'll definitely stop the degree.
Figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure that one out. So 1987.
Wow.
I was 28 years old.
Okay. So a little bit later in life?
A little bit later, yeah, slower start, correct.
Were you currently doing your occupation at the time?
I was ironworking during the day and martial arts during the night.
So you were already actively
full on
building your life, your lifestyle.
Yes.
So you talked about being an iron worker.
Correct.
How long did you do that for?
I started in ironwork 1979, and I retired in 2008 at 49 years old.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy doing it for a living?
I loved it. The only thing I didn't like was the safety people trying to tell me what I couldn't do or shouldn't do. You know how that goes.
It's absolutely fair.
And as you know me very well, I always had to push the rule, you know.
Well, that's what the rules are made for, pushing.
They broke it.
So, what was your favorite thing about being an ironworker?
My favorite thing about being an ironworker, being out there in the job site, especially new ones. I didn't really like going into factories as much or refineries. I really like to steer away from that. But I like to be out there where you can be free, do your own thing, and hang iron all day. Put the buildings up, work with the crane and the operator and the other guys, and put it all together.
Did you ever have those moments? I feel like all the union guys that I know kind of have the same story. They drive past buildings and they kind of look and go, oh, I built that. I did that. I did that.
No. That's the first rule. I did not build it. I worked on that job.
Perfect.
And to give you a quick story about it, my cousin, her father, my father was an iron worker. My grandfather helped start the local here in Toledo back in 1903, and he got his father in. So I'm a fourth generation iron worker, but she says, this is about 10, 15 years ago, there should be a monument to the ironworkers here. And I said, there is a monument. She's like, what do you mean? I said, you see that building? You see that building? You see that building over there? You see that bridge? Your parents, your grandparents, we all worked on it. Those are our monuments.
That's really cool. I have something similar. My grandfather used to work on bridges.
Yeah.
And I actually have a picture somewhere in a box where he's hanging from this bridge, the bridge that when you're going towards Toledo on the turnpike and you kind of go over it and there's that bridge off in the distance and they don't use anymore. He's hanging from that bridge doing something. And it looks like the safety expectations back in the 30s and 40s was a little different than they are today.
Yeah, it's too bad we had to move to the ones today.
Yeah.
All this tie off and stuff, it drove me crazy.
Wow. So you also said that you were doing martial arts when you joined Masonry. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
I started martial arts 2 weeks after I graduated from high school. So this was talking June 18th, 1977. One of my best friends was in martial arts. He was a green stripe, I believe, at the time. And he was taking from a guy named Dennis Bennett over on the east side of Toledo, actually in Oregon. And I'm like, you got to get me in. I want to start, I want to start practicing martial arts. Well, I'll have to talk to the instructor because it's in his house and he only takes a select amount of people. Now, mind you, we had about 5 or 6 people in the class at one time. And I went to the class and just was where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. And there's a lot of other reasons behind the fact, because when I was a little kid, I was like the third shortest kid in my class, right? I wrestled 112 in high school. That's how small I was. And whenever I would get into let's just call it a skirmish for the better words of things, my mom would ask, well, how tall was the kid? I said, well, he was only about a head taller than me, Mom. So she knew I wasn't going to back down. And I knew I needed to channel my energy and maybe not be so quick to skirmish with people. Let's put it that way. So I needed to channel it, and I needed a positive place, because I wasn't going to spend my money foolishly on other things. At that time at 18, you could drink high-level beer here, or you could go across the border to Michigan and get a mixed drink if you wanted to. I didn't feel like wasting my time and energy doing that, and I thought I should do something constructive for me.
Put it into something that was going to pay off in the future.
Exactly.
And it obviously has.
Yes.
So you are currently a black belt, not only a black belt, but you are a master of multiple styles of martial arts, not just one, but...
The master's I'm a 7th degree black belt in Taekwondo, and I have a 3rd degree black belt in Hapkido, which I tested for my 3rd degree by 1997 or 8, somewhere in there. So I haven't tested in Hapkido, and I am a red sash in Kali. So I'm maybe not a master in those, but I've been thrown on the floor a few times.
Yeah, you've played the game a couple times.
Yes.
What is it about martial arts that gets you so enthusiastic? You've been doing it almost your entire adult life.
Yeah, I've been teaching for over 45 years now. I started as a red belt teaching. And there's a correlation here between the martial arts for me and masonry. The one thing is, show me the man that has stopped learning, and I'll show you the man that put down his working tools. And even then, he's still learning.
Absolutely
at a different plane. So there's always something more to learn. There's always another avenue to explore, people to meet, people to help, for lack of better words. I got a call yesterday from a grandparent, and her son is being bullied at a neighboring school, not here in Genoa, but a neighboring school. He's 11 years old, and one of the other kids told me he should kill himself. It's like, this should not be allowed. So she was talking to her son. So what helped you the most? He said, honestly, when I was in Taekwondo, that helped me gain my confidence and stuff. And I think that's some of the correlations between the martial arts and in masonry. You got a brotherhood here where you stand for each other, you help each other. That's that hand on the back rule that we talk about. And you're there to help them. We're all here to help each other to be better men, masons, fathers, brothers, etc. So the correlation really runs very parallel.
It's actually funny you say that, because for me, I would not be a Mason if it was not for martial arts.
Correct.
I was actually one of your students, obtained and worked hard for my 1st degree black belt.
Right.
And while I was working towards that goal, you actually were the one that got me and several of the other guys involved in DMLA.
Yes.
And I have to thank you for that. I would have never had any idea of masonry if it wasn't for you.
And it was lucky for us that we were downstairs from this building right here that we're sitting in today. And if you remember right, my most, let's say, pointed suggestion was that when you get done with that meeting upstairs, make sure you bring me some pizza.
Yes, every time. Pizza, snack, cupcake, cookie, didn't matter.
Piece of pizza.
But yeah, I mean, we used to go have our meetings at about 5 o'clock, and they would be done at about 6:30 for DMLA. And then those of us downstairs were quickly changing into our uniforms to make it down at 7 o'clock.
Yes.
Because if we were late, it meant push-ups.
I wasn't that bad, I don't think.
Well, depend on the day. But it was funny because as we were doing DMLA, a lot of times the guys that we would initiate were guys who were also training in the studio.
Right.
I remember specifically Dean Camp.
Yes, Dean.
And you kind of talked to his mom. I know his grandfather is a Mason here at Genoa, and got him upstairs. And the really cool thing is because we were in DMLA together and in martial arts together, it really made our bonds a little bit tighter. I mean, even when we were in high school, Dean and I were friendly. He had some, we'll call them eclectic interests, but I'll tell you what, nobody was going to say a bad thing about my brother.
You had his back.
Always.
Yes.
I can kind of mess with him a little bit. He was my gup, but no one else got to do that.
Right.
So,
and that's another parallel when you talk about that. I have a couple students right now. I'm like, you guys would make good DMLAs because they can memorize. And you can memorize the patterns. You can memorize the sound offs and everything that you have to do in the martial arts. All right, it's time for you to go upstairs for the DMLA because it just transposes so easily from one to the other.
Well, it absolutely changed my life. I believe when I first started coming to you for instruction, I was a probably 12 or 13-year-old, rambunctious, undisciplined.
Nah, not you saying.
Oh, yeah. I'm not modest. I know what I was. But I'll tell you what, between DMLA teaching me the skills on how to be a leader,
right,
and martial arts teaching me the skills and the discipline to be a man. I mean, to not instigate the fight, but to always stand your ground and to never be afraid to do whatever you have to do, but to not be the aggressor.
Right.
It's not our goal.
Right. And if you remember, I think I said something to your grandmother once, that Sam's one of the few people I let guard the door for me. She's like, what do you mean? I says, I can relax when Sam's here. I can have my back to the door because I know he's on watch and nothing's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Really only about 15 at that time. 15, maybe 16 at the most. But there's only a few people I let watch the door for me. And my brother's one of them. He's 9 years older than me, and he's a 5th degree black belt under me, which is kind of odd because I started before him. So I get to be the teacher for him.
It's always funny how that works out.
But like I said, there's very few people I'll let watch my back, and you were one of them, and even at a young age. So, as a matter of fact, I suggested you to become an air marshal, on planes and stuff. I thought you'd make a good air marshal.
Yeah, I thought about that, and then I ended up going the healthcare route. I'm not really sure how that happened, but it doesn't quite change much. I still am kind of the bulldog.
Watchdog.
Yeah, when we get a rowdy patient that wants to try and get handsy with the nurses, I usually show up first and make sure that stops.
Well, maybe after we cut the cast, I'll tell you a couple of those, what'd you say, bulldog incidents that I had in Ironworks. But we'll save that for after.
That's for the after party.
Yes.
So we kind of brushed over it a little bit on when you joined.
Correct.
Why did you decide to join Mason?
It's funny. My grandfather was a Mason. I knew that. My uncle was a Mason. I knew that. And my wife's uncle was a Mason. And I knew these people on a different level. But when I was on a job up in Detroit, working out of town, one of the few times I had to work out of town, out of Toledo, one of my partners was a Mason. And he seen my ability to be able to memorize, work with numbers and stuff like that. He said, you know what? I think you'd really enjoy that. And that's about all he said. And so he didn't throw a lot of information at me. He just kind of planted the seed in a sense. And from there I thought, okay, so we talked about a little bit, a little time after that, this, that, and the other thing. And he just said, what's your ability to memorize? I think you'd really enjoy it and so forth. So I started asking my uncle a little bit, and I went to his house and sat down, and he opens up this paper with Masonic Bulletin, which I know now. And he said, well, you probably know this guy, right? And I go, yeah, I know him. He's a Mason. Well, you know this fellow over here? Yeah, I know him too. Well, he's a Mason also. And then I started looking at the people that he's pointing out, and lo and behold, and not by any accident, these people were people that you wanted to emulate in a sense because they held character, right? They had character. When they did a job in ironwork, you didn't have to send somebody behind them to look at how they did because you knew it was done right. That's as simple as it was. And I thought, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. Because when I was in apprenticeship, they said, pick somebody that is the best at that job and try to emulate the things that they do. Try to be that type of we call a mechanic, in the work world. Try to be that type of a mechanic that does a great job that everybody wants and it's just like that. And I say the same thing in martial arts. The more cards you hold in your hand, the better you can play the game, which means in martial arts, the more martial arts I know, the Kali, the Hapkido, the Taekwondo, I have a friend that does this, it works. I put it in my toolbox. And it's just the same thing in the ironworker world. The more I know how to do, the more employable I'm going to be. They can't take that away from me.
Absolutely.
And then add that to your reputation and your moral standing. So, yeah, masonry made complete sense to me.
And it's funny you say that because I remember one of the biggest teachings that you taught, because at least when I was learning martial arts under you, you weren't just focused on learning they're teaching the techniques and the fighting and the sparring. You almost taught a lifestyle, a mentality that should go along with those abilities. And one of those that I remember you teaching us is that our reputations will always precede us, and you only get one reputation. And if you don't keep that jewel, it's like a jewel you're wearing around your neck. If you don't keep it shiny and clean and you start to let it get tarnished, you can't fix it. It's
very hard to fix. I was explaining that exact point to somebody the other day about people like seeing ironwork. You start out when you're 18 and you're thinking, I want to, party it up and show up late and maybe not show up a couple of days, this, that, and the other thing. And then you get to be about 30 and you're thinking, I got a wife and kids. I got to get serious about this. And the people that knew you when you're 18 are going to still think you're that person, and you've changed. It's harder to get them to change their opinion of you, but you have to do it through showing them what you have become, not what you were. In the masonry world, it's a lot easier than that because you come into something with a positive attitude, and you don't have a financial gain here, but you have a gain that is intellectual and moral. And when you start from a positive point like that, it's easier to keep it going than to try to remind everybody what you used to be. And one of my sayings in martial arts is, remember that you are somebody's impression of a martial artist, a Mason, a man, an American, whatever you want to put in that little blank spot, you are somebody's impression of. And remember, there's a positive or the negative. And we're not going to be 100% on our game all day long, every day, but you keep trying to be a better person than you were before.
Like you said, it's a constant improvement. No one,
You never get to the end.
a man who, show me a master, I'll show you a man that's put his working tools down. Yeah, it makes absolute sense to me. So you were originally at Calumet.
Correct.
And then after some time, how did you end up coming to Genoa Lodge?
All right. My journey from Calumet to Genoa Lodge started out that in Calumet, 1987, we had a very big lodge, a beautiful lodge building, beautiful, beautiful. But as things started happening and the attendance or whatever you want to call it, the membership started coming down and some of the appendant bodies went to other buildings. they lost their ability to be able to financially sustain that. There, they merged in with Northern Light Lodge in Maumee. And at that time, my family life started taking off more, and I was not able to attend lodge as much. Matter of fact, the first time I attended a meeting at Northern Light Lodge was during their inspection when I was a plural member here in Genoa. And from there, I started, I lived 2 miles outside of town here in Genoa. And I started going to lodge again because my kids were older. And that freed up my time so they could be left alone a little bit. They were in their teens, whatever. And I was able to come to lodge. Then I started going to lodge a lot more steadily. Not too many meetings that I missed, probably from about 2000 on up to whenever, 15 or so. From there, I also became a member over to Pemberville Lodge, where I was just passed the master last year. And the year, 2 years before that, I became an endowed member also of Monticello Lodge because one of my black belts' dad was receiving his master mason there. I did his entered apprentice lecture for him about 3 or 4 years ago, but then he got busy because he was going to college. So then I said, I want to do your master mason lecture. So he became master mason candidate for inspection at Monticello last year. And to be able to do that, you had to be a member.
Right.
So I'm like, I might as well go all in and get an endowment there also. So now I'm an endowed member there. And I'm also a member at Paragon Lodge.
Really?
Because I did their master mason lecture this year. So
well, they could at least cover your dues for you.
They did.
Good.
They did.
They're good guys.
Yeah.
So you obviously have an enthusiasm for masonry.
Yes.
What is your favorite part about masonry?
Wow. For me, I love the memorization skills. It's one of the things, and I look at doing a lecture. When I give a lecture, I want to give that lecture to the whole room. And I want to do it the best I can. Because as I said previously, probably before we were taping, that I did Toastmasters for about 8 years. And my job at Toastmasters was to be the evaluator. That was the best job. We all had different jobs and we divvied them up every week. But when somebody was going to take a speech to a district level, they wanted me to evaluate it because all my years in martial arts, what am I supposed to do? I'm trying to help somebody improve themselves. Well, the evaluator will come into there. In being that in 8 years of Toastmasters, I learned what to do, what not to do, how to make things happen. And you've seen me do the Master Mason lecture, and I try to put everything I get into it, from voice and fluctuations to hand gestures to slowing it down to speeding it up, and all those elements into it to give that lecture to the whole room. The man sitting in the chair watching the video slide, if he's watching or if he's listening to me, I don't know because I'm not watching the slide. I want to impress upon him that I took the time to learn this lecture and to give it the best I could do. So it must be important because he's sitting here going, he put a lot of effort into that. This must be something serious. So he's going to take that away. And then everybody on the sideline, they're going, wow, that's how you're supposed to give a lecture. So to me, trying to give it, and I think of myself, I still do. I made a couple of mistakes in the EA lecture during the Monticello inspection last week. I wasn't happy with myself. I needed prompted twice, and Right Worship Brother Allred's like, you don't need prompted, so I wasn't really paying that close attention. But I had to look at it, and I'm still that rough ashler, and I'm trying to get to that perfect ashler. Haven't gotten there yet. I get close. From my wife, Lady Rebecca, she's a lady Shriner. She says, well, how'd you do tonight? I go, well, that was probably about a 9.7 on the scale. I'm trying to get to that 100%, but I say, we're getting close there on that one. And I think the best I probably ever did was on Brother Bremer's. I mean, I just gave it all to him. And I won't say it was 100 because I'm not that perfect ashler.
9.9.
I'm trying.
So speaking of lectures, we can't go into too many specifics because, we got to follow the code here.
Certainly.
But for those of you that are not listening, lectures are kind of the explanation of Masonic values. They are given to you while joining, and they very briefly kind of explain to you what it means to be a Mason and how you should act, how you should think. Maybe not in a hardline sense, but yes, conduct yourself.
It's a teaching tool.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, the things that they talk about, you're kind of actually expected to study what we talk about in your own leisure time and learn more about them.
Right.
There's only so much you can learn from a couple of quick sentences.
Well, just to clear up on lectures for the people that have never been in a lodge yet, when a person gives a lecture, it's usually 20 minutes long and it's all by memory. And then, as I stated before, you have somebody that prompts you if you forget a word or you get one sentence in front of the other sentence. There's somebody there to prompt you. So a person who's giving a lecture, it takes a little bit of time. The older I get, the harder it seems to get for me. The first lecture I learned, the EA lecture back in 2020, I gave it, as a matter of fact, for the inspection for Genoa Lodge, probably 20 years ago, almost to the day. And the ironic thing about that was the master at that time, Worship Brother Dewey, he said, "You're going to give the lecture." And he gave me about 2 months. I learned it about 6 weeks, and I gave it the first time in open lodge. The ironic thing was I gave that lecture on a Tuesday about 2 weeks and a day after 4 of my fellow ironworkers were killed on the bridge.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Now, the Master Mason lecture, I'd heard Most Worship Brother Charlie Murphy give it umpteen times sitting over here on the sidelines. Probably took me about the same 5 or 6 weeks to learn that one. Now, the Fellowcraft lecture, it was a whole lot harder for me, and I was probably a little older, so cognitively, I think I'm losing it, but maybe not as much. It took me every bit of 3 months, 3 hours a day, every day to practice that, and it wasn't until I gave it an open lodge that it actually came out where I wanted it to be. But I was racking my brains out with that lecture.
I heard it's not easy.
Oh, it was. Well, the problem was, now the people that are not Masons won't know this, but it's mostly written out word to word, where the other lectures are written out in code mostly. Easier for me to read a code and encode it and decode it in my brain and remember than it is to write out the word there, read it, and it doesn't flow as well. So when I did the Fellowcraft lecture, I had to stop, write it all in code, and then try to memorize it.
You had to kind of go back and forth on it.
Back to my strong point, which was code.
You had to recode it and then decode it again.
Yes.
Oh, that's frustrating. But you really enjoy giving these lectures.
Sure.
And from what you've said, you really enjoy kind of putting almost a dramatic flair to it, and maybe an actor's perspective to things.
Well, the worst thing you want to happen when you're giving a lecture is see everybody with their head down and they're snoozing a little bit. You want to keep them engaged, because one of the qualities of Masonry we try to bring out is to make sure that when you leave this lodge meeting tonight, because I'm taking family time away from you, so I better make this valuable. And I want everybody to walk out of here taking something away that it made it worth their time, worth their while to be up here. You want the wow factor. And sometimes that's missing, and I'm not saying in lectures it's missing, but sometimes the wow factor, and we know it as Brother Masons, when you come up here and just pay the bills and go home.
It's boring.
I could have been home playing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. Yeah, imagine that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're doing that tomorrow, so.
Yeah, that's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow.
That's
tomorrow's podcast.
But you've got to make it worth their while. And when you give a lecture like that, you have to learn how to stimulate them on different levels. And I will go back to the Toastmasters a little bit to clear it up. Toastmasters is a group, an international group, which teaches you how to better hone your skills of speaking, of listening, things of that nature. And some people will tell you, I'd rather be the man in the casket than the one giving the lecture up there, the eulogy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not too comforting, is it? Now, because they're afraid of public speaking. My wife's definitely afraid of public speaking. But me being in the martial arts, you get up in front of a crowd, you learn to do that. And in masonry also, when you're running the lodge, guess who they're looking at? They're looking at the cat with the hat, the dude running the whole show.
The
You
boss.
got to be, yeah. And you learn it though. It's not like they threw you into the hot fire. When you go through all the different stations in this lodge, you take on more responsibilities and you learn more. And then you also slowly you're being introduced to being a leader, getting up and talking.
So it's really helped you kind of hone your skills from one into the other and vice versa.
Right, correct. And especially the Toastmasters helped me because, like I said before, you learn to try to get rid of those ums, ahs, so's, and you also try to learn. I'm going to give myself away here. Don't pay attention, podcasters. Dropping my G's. We're going to the store instead of we're going to the store. So I got to learn to keep that G in my speaking terms. And the Toastmasters is one of those things that helped bring that to light more because I never was afraid of talking in front of people. Just had to learn how to make it better. So I sounded a little better educated, come across to my parents in the studio or wherever.
Continuing to use those working tools to make yourself better.
Improving.
Well, Brother Taylor, we're going to take a couple quick minutes here and go to refreshment. And when we return, we look forward to hearing more about your Masonic journey. Stay tuned, listeners.
Thank you very much.
Are you in need of new Masonic swag to wear to your next function? Maybe you need a new hat or hoodie to show your love of the craft. Check out our friends at masongear.com for some of the coolest Masonic clothing on the market. We personally like the blueprint square and compass designs. Once again, that's masongear.com. Now back to the show.
Welcome back, listeners, to the Third Degree Masonic Podcast. Thank you for rejoining us with Master Taylor, past master, and very hardworking Mason. Master Taylor, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Good. So we have talked at length about your Masonic experience already, and there's a lot of good advice and good stories that you have and good ways of thinking about the fraternity. But I did want to get a idea from you of what do you consider some of your proudest moments in the fraternity, or something that really sticks out in your mind as this is my goal in Freemasonry, or this was my purpose in Freemasonry, was to accomplish this or do this?
I never set out to be a lecturer. I did not even know what that was all about. I was impressed when I seen them as a young entered apprentice, fellowcraft and master mason candidate at that time. But when you talk about the proud moments, that giving that lecture in 2004 here was a proud moment. When I was master in 2006, and I say this to the masters before they become a master of the lodge, there's going to be a moment in that year that's really going to be like top notch for you. It's really going to be the thing that you remember the most. You have a lot of great ones, and you have some ups and downs. It's a roller coaster. You're sitting in the seat, you know how it goes, fast, and then we're going for a ride. But in 2006, the past master, the junior past master at that time was Greg Jennison. He was a D Malay. I was never a D Malay. My sisters were rainbows, but I was never in D Malay. And our goal was to get the D Malay started again. That's one of the things that we accomplished in 2006, my first year. The second year, one of the top accomplishments was giving the Daniel Carter Beard Award to Brother Vance Champion. And he was, I believe, at that time, the second person to receive that award in the state of Ohio.
Can you tell me a little bit about that award for those who might not know what that award is?
Good point. That award is giving to Masons that are very involved in the Boy Scouts. In many years, you have to have many years in the Scouts to be able to receive this, and it comes out of Pennsylvania. It's out of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. And Vance had spent many years in the Scouts. And that's one of the things about Masonry. I told you before that I didn't know that guy was a Mason when my uncle showed me this, that, or the other person. And that's often the case. You don't know that that person's a Mason or not. He exudes those same qualities that you see in Masonry, but you don't know at the time that he's a brother. And Vance, probably a lot of people in Scouting didn't know that he was a Mason, but he's living Masonry. He's living in a different avenue until he had time to become he was our Tyler at that time for several years. And you just don't know. Some people they exude those qualities, like I said. They might even be, you don't know. Whether they are or not, doesn't matter. You still want to take those qualities and incorporate them into your life, your day of walking the plumb line.
Absolutely. I've met many other Masons that I did not know were Masons in the military.
Right.
And it's always great when we find each other, but you almost can tell right away. It's like, that man is a man of good character. And then you start getting talking, and then lodge might get brought up, and then they're like, "Are you a traveling man?" And yes, I am. And
I have traveled.
in my tenure as a Freemason, barely a decade now, I've met so many Masons. I've gotten to know brothers from all over the state, from all over other states, brothers I would have never known outside of the fraternity had we not had a fraternal connection. And I sometimes lose track of how many brothers I know as associates and friends. And like I said, it's barely been a decade for me. I assume you have many stories and many people that you have met in your travels and in your time in the fraternity. Do you have someone that you really admire or you really look up to, or even a historical Masonic figure that you may admire or look up to?
One of the guys right here from Genoa Lodge that I look up to is Right Worship Brother Don Gardner. He exemplified all the qualities of a Mason. A very soft-spoken man. Taught me that first lecture, that EA lecture. Worked with me, and that's what helped build the brotherhood, you know. But the thing I like about it, Masons, I know I've been to Masonic lodges all over the world because my stepson's in the Air Force, so wherever he's stationed, that's where we vacation. And then when we go to vacation, I'm trying to find a Masonic lodge. Been to the lodge in Guam a couple times, been to the lodge in Albuquerque, and sometimes when you're out there, what one brother told me, he called it meeting brothers in the wild. You didn't know he was a Mason, but now, hey, I see you, you're a Mason. Yes, I've traveled. And then you have that connection. And that's the nice thing about it. In my ironworker world, I was lucky that I never had to really travel outside of Toledo. Went to Lima for a couple months, went to Detroit for a couple months. But had I had to go to Albuquerque to work, first thing I would have done was go to a lodge and find out where should I be in a motel so I'm not in the bad end of town? Where are some nice restaurants to go to so I know where to go? And that's the thing that they're going to lead you in the right direction. These brothers out there, that connection. And I've told this to people, and the first time when I was lodge education officer, probably back in 2014 or so, my cell phone was a flip phone. I didn't have a smartphone. I had to borrow from one of the younger brothers like yourself at that time. Can I borrow that? It was an iPhone. And some of our past masters that were sitting on the sideline, one of the fellows in particular still used a typewriter. He was a one-finger typewriter, well, two, And I said, this is how we're going to find brothers in the future. This is how it's going to happen over this little device right here. And when a person wants to investigate Masonry, he's going to go to his phone and he's going to find out what he can. And what he finds out on there might be good, bad, or indifferent, but it's all going to be on that phone. And we have to learn how to utilize this technology to help bring in the good men of the world. Because the people that are trying to find bad things, they're going to brush over the good part of it. And they're just looking for the bad part. And you gotta learn how to just let them say what they want to say and just smile at them. That's what we're taught, right? We're taught not to rebuttal them, just so mote be, and go on. But you're going to find those people that want to find the good in masonry, and they're going to find it mostly through that phone. Or guess what today they're going to do? They're going to listen to a podcast. They're going to listen to a podcast.
We definitely hope so.
You're stepping in the right direction. I was telling Brother Wilburn, I got to learn how to use a podcast here. Now that I'm on one, I better learn how to do this so that I can listen to what I've said here and critique myself. But this is the world we're stepping into. This is how you're going to reach new people. And I told them, and the guy that was using the finger plucking typewriter, that pond is sterilized. You're not going to get any fish out of that pond anymore. You have to go to where the fish are swimming and try to reach them. It's a hunting, gathering, fishing type thing.
A good fisherman casts wide nets.
Yes, and uses good bait. You got good ritual here. We got good people, good standing people. You're gonna get more to this podcast than you are for me out there, wherever on the street. With the sign saying "Join now."
Those days are long since past.
And I'm glad to see that you guys have taken the bull by the horn and steer it in the direction of the future.
Well, we really appreciate that, and that's what we hope to do with this. So, changing gears here a little bit, I very much see you as a Masonic education figure, someone who really knows some of the philosophical, esoteric parts of Freemasonry, or someone who likes to.
I probably know about 1 inch worth in a whole vast universe. Barely scratched the surface, if you want to think of it as such.
But I like how you keep pursuing education.
Have to.
And part of what you have pursued through that education is some of the Masonic education programs, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So can you tell us a little bit about some of those education programs?
The Royal Schofield Society, and if that's maybe where you're directing in direction to, is one of those things where you look inside a little bit and reflect upon what this means to me. Where did I come from? How am I going to go in the future? One of the things that we have in there is to write your lodge or your brothers, if you want to think of it, or your family, your personal family, or even non-Masons, a letter 50 years from now, and it's going to be opened up and it's going to be read here in Genoa Lodge in the year 73 or 4, that's probably 73, I believe, of what Masonic membership meant to me and being a Mason meant to me and the impact that I wanted to have on this world. Now, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag for you, so you'll have to wait for that 48 years from now to be able to hear it. But these self-inflections where we're looking inside and trying to make ourselves a better man, a better Mason, a better whatever you want to put in that blank, like I talked earlier.
That seems to be very emblematic of Masonic teachings just in our regular degrees.
Correct.
So it seems to be really exemplifying and really pushing forward good Masonic education. And we're very happy to honor you here in the lodge since you are part of the Royal Schofield Society.
Yes. I'm number 40.
There we go. It's something that we really like seeing because we've always seen you and looked up to you as younger Masons as someone of good quality, and it just continues reinforcing that to us.
Lead by example.
Absolutely.
By example.
So we're going to start finishing the interview here, wrapping up.
Sure.
Again, we want to thank you for coming on and entertaining the listeners and talking to us about your Masonic journey. Over the years, the fraternity doesn't change a lot. Freemasonry is pretty set in its ways in some things and adaptive on others. But you have obviously probably seen ebbs and flows of the fraternity and changes and reinforcements of certain things. Is there something that you have in your mind that Freemasonry may not need to change, but may need work on, or something that might serve the fraternity really well if we changed a couple of things, or something that might need to be added to the fraternity? And nothing that really changes the traditional outlook of Freemasonry, because that's why a lot of us come here. That's why a lot of us like the traditional kind of long-standing history of the fraternity. But of course, everything in the world changes or needs refinement after a while. The rough to perfect ashlar.
Definitely. The needle's ever moving. All right. I'll give you a parallel example. In my martial arts, I do patterns, 24 patterns. The patterns are the same. They're the same today as they were back in the 70s, as they should be in the 70s to come. They don't change. Our lecture, our degree work should not change, but we have to change to keep going, to be relevant. One of the ways that we need to change to be relevant, podcasting. This is a fine example of what we need to do. If we just stay behind our closed doors, we're not a secret society. Or if we were, we wouldn't be doing this podcast, obviously, correct? But people still have that perception of us being a secret society. We rule the country. When I came into Masonry back in '87, I want to say that there were probably around, I'm going to guess, 200,000 Masons in the state of Ohio. When Most Worship Brother Charlie Murphy was Grand Master of all Masons in Ohio in 2009, I believe there was around 105 or 10,000 Masons in Ohio. Today, there are probably around 60,000 Masons in Ohio. When Right Worship Brother Jeffrey Sign becomes the Grand Master of all Masons in 2029, I believe it is, there's probably going to be less. So we're not running the world here. We're just trying to make good men better. If we were running the world, our numbers would have grown exponentially beyond that fact, all right? But people want to know, well, you're doing something behind doors. What is it? Well, for one thing, what are they doing behind the doors at Coca-Cola? How do they make that product? Do you know? No. Why not? It's not your business, right? You don't need to know the secret formula to Coke, and you don't need to know the secret formula to Freemasonry. But if you want to learn it, it's there for you to approach and to learn. And like I was saying earlier, you can find everything you want on that phone, on that laptop. You can find everything about Masonry, good, bad, or indifferent. The only thing you can't find out is brotherly love, because you have to knock at that door to find it. It's in this lodge room. It's everywhere in this lodge room, everybody in this lodge room. You can walk around with a ring on your finger and tell everybody you're a Mason and never step in a lodge. You don't know what it's like to be a Mason, because you never knocked at the door. Until you do that, that's when you learn true brotherhood. And it starts where? In the heart.
That's very, very powerful and very apt to our teachings and our lessons. That's an incredible way to look at that. So we really thank you for that. That's a great message to put to our listeners. And we really admire the ability to kind of put that idea into words, because it's something that we all feel through our lessons and our instructions, but it takes a lot to be able to articulate that.
Yes, to be able to articulate it, correct. And that's one of the reasons why when some of the questions were presented to me through the email, I looked at them a little bit, but I didn't want to really dwell on it, because I don't want a set answer. I want it to happen to be free-flowing and not to be something that is well thought out. You know, this is the way it is. If you want to learn about it, it's there for you, right? Only our number one thing is, you have to have a belief in God. Doesn't ask you to believe in this, that, or the other type. Just a belief in God, in a higher power. From there, you ask somebody to become one, you have the ability to do it. In today's society, you can do it online. You can go on to freemason.com and make a petition out, and they will send it to the lodge that is closest to you, or if you articulate a lodge that you want, they'll make sure that they get that petition. Back in my day, it was hey, you know what? You probably really enjoy this. I think you'd be good at it. Before my day, it was, and I'll tell you this from when I was master in '06, we had a 50-year past master, worshipful brother Jack, doggone, I lost his name. Jack Warner. Thank you. Worshipful brother Jack Warner, 50-year past master when I was, and I handed him a book from the Ohio State because he was Ohio State fanatic. He was the voice of Genoa football. But Jack was sitting at the table at his parents' house on a weekend home from Ohio State University, sitting there having dinner, and his mother asked his father, when are you going to get Jack a petition to lodge? And he looked at her and said, he's never asked me yet. And he asked his dad for a petition right there. He didn't know back in that day that you had to. It was tight-lipped, very tight-lipped. But so it's kind of gotten better, a lot better over the years, than it was then. It was very, very much mouth to ear at that point. But that was back in 1956 or so, or whenever that was.
Wow. It's amazing how things change, but it's amazing having some still tangible stories from that time in the fraternity, which is exactly what we want to do this podcast for, is so that future Masons don't have to go rooting through very, very old paperwork and deciphering handwriting. We want to have very tangible, very personal records of Freemasonry for future generations of Freemasons.
Those records are all written in a quill pen. Have a good time reading it, because I've been to a lot of genealogy, the courthouse things, and going, what are they? I can't read that. What is that?
A lot of my friends that aren't demolays or didn't grow up writing and reading cursive, and a lot of people in the military come to me to ask me to read things because I'm one of the only people they know that can read cursive like it's just regular print, because I grew up reading it and I still write in cursive. So,
yeah.
But no, that's very, very thoughtful, very poignant, and a very good conversation to have.
Yeah. A lot of those guys that were in those books were people that founded these towns. They're all founders so they were shakers and movers.
Which is why we love our little lodge. It's fun to go to lodges like Findlay Lodge or Tiffin Lodge, huge, beautiful complexes, but these small, local, historical, lovely little lodges like Genoa are wonderful.
Yeah.
They're wonderful little places for the brothers to call home.
Yeah.
And which is why we have to continue preserving that Masonic history of the little lodges.
Yeah.
So tying our interview up and coming to a close, I'd like to ask you a few closing questions that kind of will leave advice for the future. If you were to find a young man who you knew wanted to begin his Masonic career, or a new Mason, what would you say to them? Or if you knew that you could talk to new Masons 20, 30 years from now, what would you want to tell them? What advice would you give them? What would you tell to the future Masons?
One of the things that I think that anybody that is interested in taking up Masonry or whatever it is, pay attention to the fellow over there that's not saying a whole lot. The old fellow over there in the corner, he holds a lot of information, but you just got to kind of get to his level a little bit. Might be a little crotchety at times, you know how it is. I mean, let's be real about it. But you got to get and ask them how they did and what they remember and some of the things that they did. And you got to put the new with the old, put them together, and then you meet as a brother. Therefore, I can respect what he did back then. It was a lot harder because back in that day, I'm gonna go way back to that day. Back in 1869, when Genoa Lodge was formed, it was a day to go from Genoa to Woodville. That was one day, one direction. Unless you rode a single horse or something like that, you could get there a little faster. But that was a day trip. All right. That's why you find Masonic lodges in all these little towns, because from one day to the next, that's how they traveled back then. But you look at that, what we had in common, when you get up here, bring in a positive attitude, an attitude willing to learn, and an attitude to give. When you do the two together, you're going to have a great mix. The old fellow giving you what he knows, what he learned, the new fellow, what he knows and he learned. We put these two things together. Now we're going to create a better bond, a stronger, united lodge, fraternity, whatever it may be in. It can transpose to the same thing as raising a child. When you put those things that you know to the things that they have to learn, I can't have you writing with charcoal on a piece of paper anymore like they did back in, whenever. But you have to bond the two together to become one. If not, it's like water and gasoline. We're not going to have a future in this fraternity. We have to bond together. We have to see the good in all sides, bring them together, and forge forward to a better future. And I think podcasting is one of the best things to do it.
Well, we really appreciate that. And I really like that sentiment. That's very poignant and very, very useful. And I think future generations will really appreciate the sentiment of that. And I know Sam and I will like that 50, 60 years from now, from when we're crotchety old past masters sitting on the sideline and some young Mason comes to us to ask us what was Genoa Lodge like.
And you're
Like back in the old year of 2024.
You're reading that paper of mine going, Master Taylor, there he goes.
Yeah, there he goes.
You guys didn't know him, but let me tell you, he could be a hard nose. Yeah, I also want to commend you guys, all you young fellows here in Genoa Lodge, for picking up the ball and running with it. You are our future. Just like when I was master back in 2013, my mission was to get the screen off of the front of this lodge. It was hideous. And it took the bull by the horns, and I got it done. All right. The generation before me, the Worship Brother Hobeggers, the Right Worship Brother Driver, and Worship Brother Norwalk, they took the bull by the horns and got this lodge looking nice, because it wasn't this nice looking before. It was run down in here, and they got together. So they became ownership. They gathered ownership of the lodge, just like you're doing now.
Well, we really appreciate that, especially some of the brothers present who have been spending a lot of time and effort getting the lodge up to snuff for the 21st century.
Don't forget, we're going to have another Grand Master from this lodge coming soon.
Eventually, yes, that might
People are going to be looking upon Genoa Lodge once again. That's a rarity, actually.
It is. It'll be interesting to have so many portraits of past Grand Masters out in the fellowship hall. So I would like to end on a very good, very philosophical note. What do you want to leave behind, either personally or as a Mason, for the future? What would you like to think that your legacy is? What would you like people that maybe don't know you like Brother Wilburn and I do to think of you and say, that's what Worshipful Brother Taylor was like?
One of the biggest problems, Masonry has this problem, society as a whole has this problem, is we're afraid of change. They didn't want that screen taken off because they're afraid of change. And if we don't change, we're going to die on the vine, whether it be in Masonry, whether it be in martial arts, whether it be, you put every tag you want it. We have to change. We have to go forward. You cannot stop technology. That cell phone that is about how big right today?
Oh, they can make them.
How big is it?
Well, they make smart flip phones now that are about 4 inches by
4 inches. The first phone I ever owned, the headset was bigger than 4 inches. There was a bag phone. If we stayed with that bag phone, where would we be? We had to go with technology. It's happening all around us, and you can't deny technology. You cannot deny advancement. What you have to do is you have to make sure you keep a moral culture with everything that you do, because if you just let it grow and you don't keep it, everything on the compass there, You're going to have problems, but we're going to have to go forward. And one of the things that I wanted, my legacy is there was a man that when something happened, he was for it because it was for the good of the order, the good of the fraternity, the good of whatever it might be. He's ready to accept change, willing to accept change. And I'm sure someday when I'm in the nursing home, my daughter's going to throw this podcast in my face and say, look, Dad, it's time to change. You know, but you always have to be willing to change, always be willing to learn. Learn. That's the number one rule. Always be ready to learn, be willing to learn.
How does the phrase go? And I think it can be applied to Freemasonry too. Society runs best when old men plant trees that they know their shade they will never sit under.
That's correct. That's correct.
And I think you're doing that for Freemasonry, Master Taylor. I think you really are, and we really appreciate that.
Well, I hope that my legacy is when you read that letter in 50 years, less than 50 years now, that, you know, you guys will maybe have a tear run down your cheek and go, you guys missed somebody that was special, but he's still here.
Absolutely. Thank you, listeners, for joining us on the Third Degree Masonic Podcast with Worshipful Brother Taylor. It's been a pleasure to have you. If you can find it within your hearts to like and subscribe and to follow us on social media, we would be ever grateful. And remember,
craftsmen, keep your working tools in order and always be on the level.
The views and opinions expressed on this show do not in any way reflect those of the Grand Lodge of Ohio, its officers, or its jurisdictions. All opinions are expressly those of the hosts or guests.